Welcome to Thriving Relationships with Jessica Hartley. Today I have my guest Brittany on the show, and we're going to talk all about how to give the power of relationships back to women. See, the thing is about relationships. This is the woman's world. This is her territory. This is her domain. You know, we are all about connection and togetherness and cohesiveness and nurturing and empathy and emotions. And this is the world of relationship. This is our domain. This is where our strengths are. So we have the capacity to not only set our relationships up to thrive, but to also tap into those key strengths that will allow them to thrive, in spite of whatever it is that our spouse is bringing in from his childhood, from his past, from his masculine world, and actually be the leader of love in relationship. It is the woman that is responsible for helping the man or the masculine in her world go from his head to his heart, because we reside in our hearts. And so this is what we need to talk about, because it's not being said enough. You know, so many times what I hear is, I need my partner to meet me halfway. Or I'm tired of doing all of the work and he's not doing anything. You know, I hear women saying they want loyalty from their partner. They want commitment. They want that feeling of that he's all in. They want respect. You know, some of the biggest things that women struggle with is an inability to communicate easily with their spouse about the things that are important to them. What would you say that you have struggled the most with in your relationship?
I guess miscommunication. You know, you think that you yourself as a woman, you're communicating everything. And sometimes you can be communicating perfectly, but the man will hear something completely different. And then he'll, you know, process that and respond back. And it's probably not perfect. So it's just, you know, miscommunication, because I think women and men think so differently. And everyone comes with their own backgrounds and their own perceptions that it can easily be miscommunicated.
Yes. And, you know, so this is the art of interpersonal communication that we're talking about here, which is very different from speaking on a stage or speaking as an authority to a group of subordinates. You know, we're talking about respectful interpersonal communication, which is really our world as the feminine in the relationship. It's our world because the way to thrive in this area requires empathy first and foremost. This is a skill that women have. Yeah. Women are much more closely held to the ability to empathize, you know, and what our strengths are can sometimes be our weaknesses. You know, so for example, if we have too much empathy, then we will, you know, people please, or we will take on some negative emotions. And then if we have too little, then it's also not to our benefit. But if we learn to use our skill and our strength of empathy, we can actually be influential. You know, this is the key. It's not the way to communicate well is to develop that sense of empathy, you know, to be able to put yourself in your spouse's shoes and to be able to speak to your spouse from the place of understanding what motivates him, or what he needs to hear, or what nurtures him, and to use the art of influence and empathy to nurture and influence into whatever it is that you're wanting to communicate. You know, and it's a skill to develop in communication, but it's our skill. You know, this is something that we need to be aware of and tap into better. So the other thing that we face as women, generally, you know, some of the biggest struggles that we face is that we feel like we're taken for granted. You know, so this can sometimes come in when we feel like we're doing all the work and they're doing only a little bit of the work, or when we feel burnt out, exhausted, overwhelmed. And also in areas where we feel like we're committed and we're dedicated to the relationship. We honor our spouse, but then we're not receiving that same kind of energy or commitment or dedication or honor back towards us. you know? And so this is a struggle that so many women are facing, is this feeling of being taken for granted. And yet again, this is another strength that is untapped inside of us, because there are a couple things that will help us to negate that, to make sure that that doesn't happen. And there are two of our skills. The first is to be so nurturing, you know. So when we learn our skill of nurturing, we come in and we come into this world, and we're the creators of bringing forward life into the world.
Yeah.
You know, this comes through us. This creation process is through us. And we are the nurturers in the dynamic of the world. You know, we are the ones that care about the emotional and the physical well-being of the individuals, of the children in front of us. And we can also bring this skill, this nurturing, to our spouse. You know, so when we understand that our spouse is coming from a very masculine world, where, you know, it's very opposite of the feminine. You know, it's about competition, it's about logic and reasoning and cause and effect. And this world is a bit harsh. You know, there's
analytical.
Yeah, there's not as many there's very little room for empathy. There's very little room for understanding. And our spouse needs our nurturing too. And it's something that we neglect as women. Is, you know, sometimes we get in this role of nurturing as the mother, and especially once we have kids and we start giving and giving. But see, this nurturing aspect inside of us is meant to come through us, meaning it's meant to fill our own cup first and then be given into the world around us. And that first world is our family, you know. And then when we nurture our family, when we nurture our spouse can go in the world and be dynamic, or the leader that they need to be, or, you know, whatever it is that they need. But when we don't do that, then they start operating from an empty cup as well. And so the problem often is that we have this misperception that we need them to meet us halfway, but it's not so much that. It's that if we step into our role of really being the nurturer in the relationship and let it come and fill ourselves up first, which is the second dynamic, is that we are self-sufficient. Because we are the nurturers, just think about how when we deliver a child into the world, we automatically have breast milk that the child can eat on for 6 months, and that's all they need. They don't need anything else. And where does that come from? From within inside of us. And it's a really great metaphor, because this is how we are meant to be self-fulfilled in this way. So often we are dependent on the approval or the validation or the respect or the support of our spouse. And it's really meant to come the other way, because when we can really step into that role, then we are in our feminine in the highest form, you know, because when we are self-fulfilled, we become magnetic, we tap into our confidence, we tap into our worth, we know our worth, and we become captivating, you know. So then we draw forward towards ourselves the things that we're wanting to bring into our world and share our world with, you know. So we have to start learning to develop these skills for ourselves. Let the nurturing come through us. And that means self-honor, you know. It also means independence. It means being able to honor, speak my voice, be true to myself, and be authentic, and to know my confidence, and then to be able to bring that forward into how I am being in my relationship.
So it seems like these are all strengths, and it also seems like even though they are our strengths, they can also be our biggest struggles. And so, like, is that when women come to you, do you see them coming to you with struggles that should be their strengths?
Absolutely. I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is what happens is that, you know, these areas that we're meant to step fully into, they show up in conflicts, and, you know, conflict after conflict, we'll start to see a pattern. You know, it'll feel like the same feeling over and over again. For example, not being understood over and over again, or the feeling of being taken for granted over and over, or disrespected. And because it's showing up so much, it's really saying that we need to do something different. There's a different path than the one we've been taking. And we have to be aware of that. And then we have to say, okay, well, what is the path? What is the path that I'm meant to take then with this? And this is where, you know, I'm shining this brilliant light on understanding that this is our strength. And our strength works this way to fuel ourselves and then our spouse. You know, our strength works from our own internal development and conscious attention to. And the more that we do something, the more that we get in practice of it, then we can actually start to integrate it into our relationship. And that's when we'll see everything change. You know, so another really amazing strength that we have as women is our sexual energy. You know, this is not something that men have. Men don't necessarily have a sensual side to themselves. You know, this is women's territory. And it is something, you know, our sensual vitality is meant to ignite our creative energy. It is meant to be revitalizing and healing for us. For us. Yeah. And you know, the thing is that in our world today, you know, there's so many messages that contradict that. You know, it says as if sex is meant for men. You know, and the other thing that really contradicts our ability to step into our sexual vitality and that power that it can give us, and then we share it with our spouse, or whomever we bring into our world, is that the biggest key to being able to step into our sexual vitality is our self-love. You know, and there's so many messages out in the world negating that, you know, saying that women have to, you know, idealizing a very narrow standard of beauty. And when we look at that standard of beauty and we don't fit into it, we either despise ourselves or we change and shift ourselves to fit into it. You know, and also needing the validation from men in order to feel beautiful. You know, and that's so backwards. Our validation must come from ourselves. And whenever we put our validation or our need for approval into anything outside of ourselves, especially in the hands of men, be it our spouse even, then we lose our power. We lose our strengths. We step right out of our femininity and we go into a victim. And then what happens? We get needy, we become nagging, and then our cup is not filled. So then we get controlling and manipulative, and then we start to reside in our fears and our insecurities that we picked up from childhood. So, you know, we all have fears and insecurities. And it's part of our path to heal and nurture those. And that's the other thing.
I feel like that's such a practice, because I feel like every woman has experienced that at one point in their lives or another. And some are repeat offenders of that. And I feel like others are better at that. So what do you think, how do you practice that? Like, how do you create your self-honor but still live in this world? You know, because I feel like it's so clashing.
You know? You know, the thing that's so imperative to point out is that, for example, this standard of beauty is, you know, it's like if we have this standard of beauty and then we all try to normalize and look like that standard of beauty, then no longer will it be beautiful.
Right.
You know, it's like beauty, real beauty is in the eye of the beholder, you know, and that means me. You know, so for me to not only love and adore myself, but to really tap into the connection that I have within myself, me and my body, me and my spirit, me and my energy, and just loving my worth. Number one, knowing my worth. And part of that is saying, okay, I have strengths.
Yeah.
And I'm going to use them,
Yeah.
And instead of giving those away and just being so dependent and not really knowing what they are. And I think that's the greatest fallacy to our lack of strong feminines, is that we don't really know where our strengths are. If we did, then we'd have much more awareness to develop them.
Yeah.
And then use them to our benefit.
Yeah. Is that what you think is your biggest asset to women, is helping them find their strengths?
Yes.
And do they find them a lot of the time? Or is it, I just feel like most women have no clue what their strengths are, and they try to copy the masculine. So they let go of the feminine. And, how do you change that mindset?
Right. And that's a lot of what we've seen so far happening in the world, is that, women are standing up for themselves, which is great, but then they're taking on this, sort of authority and force and using, demanding. And that's not really where our power is. So it's like we're trying to use the masculine model for power and for creating change. Which is necessary. We obviously need that, but that's not where we're the most powerful, or where we are the most effective. So absolutely, it's like let's get in touch with these strengths and let's use them. Let's develop them and use them, because the truth is that if we don't use them, if we don't even know about them, and then if we don't develop them, then they just stay dormant inside of us.
Yeah.
Like our intuition is another great example. Our intuition is something that women have. And so many women tell me that they don't even know what that is. They don't feel strong in it. It's like this untapped skill. This is one of our biggest pathways to making really amazing decisions, to being able to connect the left and right sides of our brain, to finding trust, and these are things that are essential to our well-being. It's like if you don't nurture and grow into who you're meant to be, then you will always feel lost. You will always feel misplaced or misguided, or just struggling. And so when it comes to relationship, this is one of the greatest areas for our own development, for our own personal development, is in the arena of relationship. Because it's when we're in relationship that our partner will sort of shine a mirror back onto us and say, there's a place inside of you that's out of alignment, and we could see that through each conflict. And so that it's really about learning how to tap into that skill and then to use it, for our growth. And here's what happens when we really start to develop and step into our femininity. We are empathetic. We are self-fulfilled. We're confident. We're self-honoring. We're so aware of our worth and independence that we keep our partner in a state of understanding that there's a give and take, instead of, what we're currently doing is sort of saying, okay, I'm all in, you got me, I'm here to stay, I'm going to adore and nurture you, and I'm going to do all this stuff. And then, it's like,
wait for the response.
Yes. And the spouse can't help but to say, okay, that's a little bit too easy. And it's when it's too easy that they lose interest.
Because they're hunters by nature. They want the chase. They want the hunt.
Right. And the masculine by nature is likes that, that cause and effect sort of dynamic, and when there's just a steady constant, then you're just going to stay put. There's this amazing study that was done years and years ago where a bird was given food and the food was just readily available to it at any time. But in order for him to get it, he had to press a button, and then he would get the food. And when it was just readily available to him, he hardly ever pressed the button. He just did it, whenever he wanted it.
Right.
And then when the food was given to him, when the food was there and available, and then taken away at times, the bird pressed the button a lot in search for the food, a lot more than when the food just was always there. So because even though it had its normal amount of food, it was always wondering, is the food going to be there?
Yeah.
And so it's a similar concept, is that because we're self-fulfilled and because we're independent and we're not so dependent on our spouse, then we can, honor ourselves at time, take ourselves away for a girls' weekend. Whenever we start to get that hint that that we're being taken for granted, it's a really great reminder. I've been too available.
Yeah. You still need to chase me.
Right. And to say, how can I step back into my self-nurturing and to fill my own cup? Yep. Whenever you start to feel that we're getting needy, or that we're having too many expectations. And, because the thing is that when we are getting into those places, needy, naggy, expectations, demanding, etc., we'll see it because our spouse will rebel against it. Yeah. And it will create a conflict. And that's when we were really meant to step back instead of fighting and saying and continuing to feel taken for granted and that our spouse is a horrible person or whatever it escalates into, is just to see that it's just the natural dynamics of humanity at play. We really are, one of our human traits, men and women, are to eventually, take things for granted that are constant. We all do this. Yeah. And that's something to recognize, because even ourselves as women do it. And we just don't do it as much because our spouse they're naturally independent. They're not, whereas we reside in community and connection. Right. They reside in independence and self-reliance, and so when we step into our highest form, we also step into those areas, but through a different route, through the self-nurturing and through the self-adoration and through the self-honoring. Okay. And that when we do that, then we create the same sort of dynamic, but just in a feminine way, and then we are, we're much more able to thrive.
This is all making so much sense. I'm loving this.
Yes. And so, some of the other things is that is amazing about us as women that we also need to develop and tap into is our capacity to problem solve. And this comes into play when we come into conflicts. We're really good at being able to see the multitask and to see a bigger picture at hand, how this is going to affect our child in the long term, for example. We're able to tap into the emotional realm and the mental realm because we have 30% more connecting neurons in that bridge part of our brain that goes from the right to the left side of the brain. And so that means that we have the capacity to be very much in our emotion, but to also tap into and gather good information and create solutions from that logical, analytical side as well. So women in the business world are really great because we're typically really great at brainstorming and things like that, planning, strategic planning and things like that. And the masculine is really good at execution, and getting things done. And, women are, it's certainly true in my world is that I am a planner. I love to have everything organized and planned and think about, okay, since I'm holding on to all these hats, right? Let me make sure that they sync up and line up in harmony and all work together, and then dinner's on the table, right? And it's this beautiful balance, and it's something that we're really great at. Yeah. We're really great at being able to do that. And part of what we need to use and tap into and develop that a little bit more is to use that for our conflict resolution and to use that for understanding how to serve ourselves first instead of just giving to our family and then the world around us. And that's one of our biggest fallacies, our biggest weaknesses, because we're so good at nurturing and
serving
giving
everyone else.
That we fall into the trap of forgetting that, whoa, this doesn't work just from, me outward. I have to fill myself first. And it also doesn't work. A lot of women try to get it from their spouse, and they say, well, again, I need them to meet me halfway, or I'm doing everything and they're not meeting me. And here's the thing is that we will solicit their participation, their genuine participation, their genuine respect, their genuine loyalty when we step into our femininity in its highest form, in its capacity that it's meant to be. When we learn to control our weaknesses, like the need for validation and not nurturing ourselves, and instead develop, and in that its place develop where our strengths are, then we are operating in our highest form. And it's a journey, and the other thing is that we can understand all of this, but the trick is actually putting it into practice.
Right.
We could talk about this all day long, but when it comes down to it, when I'm triggered, my partner says something and it triggers something from my past, my walls will still go up, right? Unless I put it into practice, unless I get really aware. And the other area that is sometimes our weakness as women is because we reside in this emotional world, we can react emotionally out of balance or from an ungrounded place to where maybe our emotions are way up here and we're no longer thinking logically about the conflict or about the situation. One thing that happens in our brain is that when we go into a big emotion, our amygdala goes into fight or flight. And when we're in fight or flight, it cuts off access to the parietal lobe of our brain, which is the reasoning and the critical thinking part of our brain. And so we don't even have access to it anymore. And we're only running off of our emotions. And it's usually fear. And so no wonder we're, emotionally ungrounded, you know, and that's an area that we need to learn to control. When we need to learn how to not only control, but eliminate it as best we can. We're not perfect, right? But we can become better and more grounded at our emotional reactions, and control the way that we react in the moment, and allow ourselves to access our critical thinking. And here's what happens when we do that: we stay grounded. Yeah. When we stay grounded, then we can communicate more effectively through empathy and understanding and nurturing with our spouse. Yeah. And when we do that, we receive. And that is how we receive the things that we are wanting from our spouse. When we want the honor, the loyalty, the dedication, the, just the affection, the desire, when all these things that women constantly feel in lack of from their spouse, the way we've been going about it is flawed. It's not working, clearly, because the same feeling comes up over and over again. Yeah. So look at it as, here's your sign, it's not working. If it happens again over and over, if you feel the same thing, it's not working. Yeah. Pay attention to that.
It's not like the definition of insanity.
Yes.
Like doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results.
Right. But we all do it. Even that bird that was pecking, it's expecting something different. It's a natural thing. So we have to really transcend our subconscious thinking and rise above that and use it for our growth, use it for our ability to create a relationship that is thriving, by being fully in myself, fully in my feminine, and then allowing and respecting my spouse to be fully in their masculine, and allowing them to, and this is when we're thriving in that beautiful yin yang symbol, and in that beautiful harmony of the masculine and the feminine, because it's absolutely true that we need both. Right. You know, we don't need a world that's run entirely by women, and we don't need a world that's run entirely by men.
Right.
You know, and when we have that, we're going to have a lot of different outcomes that don't serve us. You know, we need the balance.
Right.
And I think that where we are at right now in society and in the times is that we're out of balance in that, because we've been so much in this patriarchal society, and women aren't stepping into their highest form of femininity.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's really the message.
Yeah. I feel like women are starting to swing. They're starting to get more power, but I feel like it's the wrong type of power. I feel like they're trying to be more patriarchal and more masculine, you know, because I think for so long we thought we didn't have power. So now we're it almost feels like a desperation, like a power grab, you know?
Yes.
Whereas if we just, you know, like you said, you just take a deep breath, figure out your strengths, own it, that's when you can make the most change and the, you know, the better influence for all mankind, basically.
Absolutely. And it starts with us in our world, me and my world, and then me and my relationship. And even that, if we just make those two changes, we will be affecting the world.
Right.
Because everything is a ripple effect. You know, and like I said earlier, when we nurture ourselves so much that we could nurture our spouse and bring them from their head to their heart.
Yeah.
You know, then, you know, when they're being, for example, if I was in my strength and my spouse came to me and started criticizing or disrespecting in some way, instead of me lashing back out and joining him on that same level,
Right.
I would empathize and I would say, it looks like you're having a hard day.
Yeah.
You know, what's going on?
And bring him up to your level instead of you coming down to his.
Yeah, you know, and elevating
Yeah.
them into their heart. And that when they do that, what are they going to do? They're going to reciprocate that. You know, it's very clear that once you can see how it works, then they're going to respect you back and say, oh my gosh, I was, you know, absolutely wrong. I should not have talked to you that way, you know, and thank you for reminding me, you know, and things like that. And that's how we will thrive in our relationships and then eventually in the world, you know, so it's the same model. You know, when the world is doing anything that's unthoughtful, from that masculine, getting things done kind of attitude, not having empathy about who it's affecting or what it's affecting, you know, and then we bring in the feminine and we say, hey, I understand where you're coming from. I get it. See, I see that you're doing good in your efforts, but think about this. And what about this? And we need to bring this into awareness as well. Yeah. And how can we problem solve and create a solution that works, including all of these considerations? Yeah. You know, but if we were to say instead, no, that's wrong, and we're going to shoot it down, and we're going to, you know, then all we get is pushback.
Right.
Walls, defenses, and arrows, because it's a threat. Right. You know, it's a threat to their everyone's egos, really, you know, and the feminine has an ego, but we don't reside in that. You know, that is more of a masculine thing out in the masculine world, you know, and so it's easily triggered in that world. And when we are not in our strengths, then ours is also easily triggered as well, you know, and so it's just really about letting go, surrender. Yeah. You know, a lot of our work is similar to, you know, again, the metaphor of childbirth and bring a child into the world and nurturing. You know, the best way to bring forth that child into the world is through surrender, not fighting it. You know, when we fight, we tighten our muscles, and then we make it stop. Yeah. And that's exactly what happens when we as women are fighting the negativity or the harshness or the force that's coming at us. Yeah. And we make the progress just stop. Yeah. You know, instead of actually shifting it into another direction.
Yeah. This whole time you were talking, I was thinking about breath work and how important that is. You know, when you're talking about childbirth, how, you know, if you tense and you're not breathing, you stop everything. And I think that's also with like our reactions with it, you know, be it our spouse, our children, our coworkers. I think taking a breath and just communicating from your heart instead of just spouting, you know, what's ever on the tip of your tongue. Kind of reminds me of Daniel Tiger.
Oh, yes. I love that
My
cartoon.
kids watch Daniel Tiger. And he says something like, you know, when you're so mad and you want to roar,
just
take a deep breath
and count to 4.
Exactly. like that whole thing was just in my mind when you were saying, like, Daniel Tiger, he's so on. Maybe he learned it from you, Jess.
Yes. Well, he learned it from Mr. Rogers, who was
Mr. Rogers,
pretty
yes.
amazing, I have to say. Yes. But you're absolutely right, because it's about breath. You know, breath will help us go from our heads back to our hearts.
Yeah.
You know, and when we feel triggered, you know, when our walls start to go up and our hearts start to close, that's our sign, our signal. Whoa, calm down. You're reacting out of your ego. You're reacting out of your fears. It's time to get centered again in my truth of who I am.
Yeah.
Because when we don't do that, when we don't calm ourselves, then we're still running the cortisol and the fight or flight hormone and the adrenaline, and we don't have access to our reasoning mind. So we have to calm down first.
Yeah.
We have to stay grounded in in who we really are. And then we could bring forward the truth. And when we don't, then we get seen. Then we're seen for this weakness that we are.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why our you know, the men will say to women, oh, you're so crazy, you know, or look how crazy you're acting, or, you know, all the things. And in a way, they have a point, you know, because we're not being we're not being true to who we really are, and we're acting outside of that, and we're acting from our weakness, you know. And men have a crazy side too. They certainly do. You know, we're not the only ones, and they have opportunities to grow as well. But see, growth is in our domain. Relationship is in our domain, and these are the areas that we can elicit and serve our spouse, our children, and the world with. You know, it's really about stepping into it, and we've got to own it for ourselves first before we try to give it to the world around us. Yeah. You know, and it starts with us. So that's really the message. And so I'm throwing a Sacred Feminine workshop this weekend, actually.
I'm so excited for that.
Yes, and it's going to be all about this content and really stepping firmly into the feminine and exploring what each of those strengths are and how to use them more effectively.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be amazing, especially just being in a room with a bunch of women, right? It's that tribe, that community that we lack sometimes, I think, in this modern world. You know, everyone is so busy with their lives. Yeah.
Yes, we thrive. That's one of the other places that we can pull energy from, is from each other, from the nurturing and empathy of each other, you know, as women coming together. And that's another thing, is that in our society right now, instead of women supporting each other, we see women as a threat sometimes, you know. So because we're in this world of competition, this masculine side, and because we have these ideal, these narrow standards of what's good or what's beautiful or what's worthy, and so we get jealous of feeling like we're not that, and then we feel like we need to compete or we need to be better than our fellow woman. And that's all just paradigms that we've been brainwashed into. And our strengths are in really honoring the beauty, honoring the worth, and developing those things inside of ourselves, and doing the same for our fellow sisters.
Rising everyone up.
Yes. Yes. And that's who we really are as women. You know, we bring forth beauty and growth and abundance. And when we're in that place, we're very attractive, magnetic, captivating. You know, when we're in that place, we're in our highest form, and everything just works much more in harmony, and especially our relationships. So the key message is that our relationships are struggling because we are not fully owning nor stepping into the feminine strengths that we have access to. So thanks for coming on the show with me today.
Thank you for having me.
It was such a pleasure, and I hope that this message will be heard around the world.
I hope so.
Bye for now.